Hey everyone, this video is the continuation of my previous one discussing one theory of how chronic pain patients and conditions arise through the idea of central sensitization. If that sentence made no sense to you, I really do recommend that you watch that video first because it will catch you right up. Damn it, I meant this video up here. As I said before, chronic pain is a very complicated field. There are entire fields of study dedicated to it. If you do have any questions, please leave them in the comments below or feel free to message me directly. In a quick summary of the previous video, chronic pain conditions arise out of a phenomenon referred to as central sensitization, and central sensitization is caused by chronically sustained low levels of peripheral or systemic inflammation. Without intervention against these chronically sustained levels of inflammation, there won't be a change. Chronic pain will persist. And the three most common sources of that kind of peripheral inflammation include stress, diet, and physical activity levels. All right, all that's out of the way, let's get into it. Because we know that stress, diet, and physical activity are three main contributing factors to these levels of inflammation, we know that we need to reach those particular areas. In theory and from the outside, making lifestyle suggestions to change some things is very easy to do, but in practicality and implementation, a lot more difficult. Everybody's situation is different, and some people's lives, just quite frankly, are a lot harder than other people's, and as such, are much more challenging to modify. With that kind of mini disclaimer out there, let's start with stress. There are so many different reasons for people to be stressed out right now. Honestly, there's probably always been a lot of reasons to be stressed out, but now as a young adult, I'm definitely seeing some more that I wasn't as a teenager or kid. Aside from the modern day cliches of practice mindfulness, meditate, and talk to someone, all of which can rightfully be helpful in their own ways, I've found an additional strategy to be particularly effective in dealing with my own stresses as well as the stresses of some of my patients. Dr. Stephen Covey is the author of probably one of the most influential self-help or self-improvement books of all time, being The 7 Habits of Highly Productive People. Now, probably the most important concepts that I think he mentions in his book is this idea of a circle of influence. He uses it from a productivity point of view, but I prefer to look at it from a stress management point of view. I'll put it up on the screen now so you can kind of visualize as I go along describing it. The basic premise of the circle of influence revolves around two circles. One is large and the other is smaller. The smaller circle is located within the large one. Now, the larger exterior circle is referred to as our circle of concern. These are all of the things in our lives that cause us concern or stress. We're looking at global warming, the state of the economy, the state of the pandemic, our expenses, what's for dinner, the health of our loved ones, the reckless way other people drive their cars, the house being a mess, the terrifying news media that you consume. All of that is contained within our circle of concern. The smaller interior circle is our circle of influence. These are the things in our lives that we have direct control over, some of which are the previously mentioned stressors. What's for dinner, a messy house, the media that we choose to consume, as well as to a degree our expenses. Because these stressors sit both within our circle of concern and our circle of influence, they are stressors that we can actively take steps towards addressing and therefore eliminating. When we can eliminate specific stressors from our lives, we actively decrease the overall levels of stress that we experience. Dr. Covey argues that with continuous focus on our circle of influence, it actually grows larger, which then encapsulates stressors that were previously only contained within our circle of concern and we thought we had no control over. A very good example of this is the connection between a messy house and the health of our loved ones. With an aging population, the #1 highest injury-related cause of mortality in elderly family members is falls. By maintaining a clean home, the risk of falling for the elderly is reduced, and therefore we are, in a way, taking control of the health of our loved ones. It makes a lot of sense from both Dr. Covey's productivity as well as kind of my perspective of stress management to focus on your circle of influence, instead of keeping the focus on your entire circle of concern. Keeping your focus on stressors that you have no objective control over leads to chronically sustained levels of stress, leads to chronically secreted cortisol, leads to desensitization by the body to cortisol, leads to desensitization to the body's most potent anti-inflammatory, leads to chronic peripheral inflammation, leads to the central sensitization, which leads to chronic pain. I had to do that take like 10 times, just so you know. And if instead we focus on our circle of influence and address the stressors that we can, we decrease the overall amount of stress in our life. which hopefully decreases that whole cycle. For more information, you can either read Stephen Covey's book yourself, The 7 Habits of Highly Productive People, or you can read the summary for the Circle of Influence that I will link in the YouTube comments down below. Okay, getting on to diet. The largest part of the battle for healthy anti-inflammatory nutrition is education. Cravings and addictions aside, it is very easy to make healthy nutrition decisions if you know what healthy nutrition decisions are. If you haven't before, I highly recommend that you start reading nutrition labels. We know that trans fats and added sugars promote inflammation, so the obvious solution there is to decrease, or if not outright cut, those kinds of foods. This also includes things like refined carbs, processed meats, and fried foods. You could consider looking into the Mediterranean diet, which consists largely of anti-inflammatory foods as well as omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. No, hold up, these are the healthy fatty acids, okay, not the unhealthy ones that we talked about before. Omega-3 fatty acids are found to reduce the levels of inflammation within the body, and it has been previously thought that omega-6 fatty acids can actually promote inflammation by inhibiting omega-3, but the findings on this are controversial. The mindset is starting to shift towards the ratio of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids being the important thing for decreasing inflammation, so the Mediterranean diet would allow for increase in both omega-3 and omega-6 to keep that ratio consistent. As well, foods that are antioxidants, again for which the Mediterranean diet primarily consists of, they work by decreasing oxidative stress on our body, which then decreases inflammation. The field of nutrition is very large and complicated, and if you're Googling stuff yourself, there's a lot of misinformation and people saying what you should do who quite honestly don't know what the heck you should actually be doing. Therefore, in addition to your own readings, it can be very helpful to seek the guidance of a dietitian or a nutritionist. A popular strategy employed by both these professions is the idea of keeping a food log. Make the effort to write down all of the things that you put into your body for a week, as well as your hunger levels before and after. Taking the unconscious out of eating and replacing it with conscious focus helps us to identify foods that we are not necessarily eating out of hunger, but for other reasons. It also lets you see if there are any obvious food choices that you could replace with something better, perhaps. Do you see an opportunity to cut inflammatory foods and replace them with anti-inflammatory foods? Perhaps you could skip out on Burger Wednesdays and get salmon instead. But again, talk with a nutritionist and a dietitian. They will be able to help you out way more than any YouTube video, including my own, will be able to. And lastly, that brings us down to physical activity levels. In order to break the chain of progressive deconditioning in physical activity, you're gonna have to push through a little bit of pain because you're gonna have to do some exercise. As such, it makes the most sense to try to reduce peripheral inflammation as much as possible through the other two methods first, that are stress management and diet modifications, before we look too seriously at modifying our physical activity levels. As mentioned before, avoidance of activity leads to progressive deconditioning, which then leads to pain on activities that previously did not cause pain, which then leads to more avoidance of activity, which then leads to more progressive deconditioning. A lot of positive feedback loops today. It's pretty well established at this point that moderate levels of exercise actually work to decrease inflammation and decrease the pain perception. As such, we want to gradually reintroduce levels of activity as tolerable. Going from a sedentary lifestyle to an Arnold Schwarzenegger 5x5 strength routine is a great way to get hurt. However, beginning with daily walks that gradually increase in duration each week is a great place to get started. Given enough time, resistance training could be a phenomenal source of moderate exercise for you to reduce inflammation levels. Oh, and here's the research to back that up. You're not limited to just resistance training either. You could also explore things like yoga, cycling, or other aerobic exercises too. The best kind of physical activity is the one that you enjoy. Exercise, much like nutrition, is an entire field in itself with many misconceptions. Again, the real challenge is the education and knowledge of the patient. Seeking out a CSCS or Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, a reputable personal trainer, an evidence-based chiropractor, or an exercise physiotherapist could be of great benefit to you. In summary, the persisting theme between addressing all three factors of chronic levels of peripheral inflammation is not knowledge and education of the patient. It is not possible to solve a problem unless you are given the knowledge needed to use the tools to solve it. That is why, at least in my practice, the concept of patient empowerment, for which includes education, is so important, and I believe it should be employed in essentially every healthcare setting that there is. While one method of education is simply looking stuff up on the internet, there is a lot of trash on it. It can be very difficult to determine what information is most applicable to you, or to know the credentials of whomever it is that you are reading. People who have dedicated their entire lives towards healthcare or their very specific narrow fields of study and expertise probably know more than Janice down the street writing her weekly blog. No offense to any Janices that watch this. Seek out the thoughts and opinions of those who have spent the time learning about these things, also known as doctors. It takes time, knowledge, a lot of self-awareness, and a lot of patience for trial and error, but your chronic pain condition can be managed and it can be overcome. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you know anyone who you think this video could benefit even a little bit, please share it with them. Otherwise, I'd really appreciate a subscribe down below. And again, thank you for watching. You can click here for the previous video and you can click here for the most recent one. Have yourselves great days.